About 25 years ago, my sister experienced something that still gives her chills to this day. At the time, she was in high school, and even now, at 39 years old, she often talks about what happened that one eerie morning. My sister has always been a morning person. Even back in those days, she would get up at around 5 a.m., long before the rest of us. She had a routine, quietly making her way to the kitchen, preparing breakfast for herself, and packing her lunch for school. She was always very independent, not wanting to disturb anyone else. My parents usually woke up around 7 a.m., enjoying a slow start to their day with coffee, while the rest of the house stayed quiet. One particular morning, after she had finished making her breakfast and lunch, she decided to sit by the side door of our house. From this door, she could see directly into our neighbor's yard. Now, this house had been vacant for over a month, so it was unusual for anyone to be there. But as she sat there, waiting for her school bus, something caught her eye. She noticed two women sitting on the old wooden bench outside the neighbor's house. The bench itself was weathered, covered in dust, and looked like it had been there for years. But what was strange was that these women seemed to have appeared out of nowhere. My sister couldn't see their faces because they were turned away from her, but she could make out their messy, dark hair, which looked unkempt, as if it hadn't been brushed in a long time. The women were talking, but their conversation sounded strange. My sister couldn't understand what they were saying, but she could hear their voices growing louder. It wasn't English or any language she had ever heard. It was almost as if they were speaking in a forgotten or ancient tongue. Even though she couldn't make out the words, she could feel the tension between them. It sounded like they were arguing. For a moment, my sister brushed it off. She figured it might be some early morning visitors or someone passing through. But then she remembered the house had been empty for a while. No one was living there, and certainly no one had permission to be on the property. Still curious, my sister decided to do something a bit reckless. She picked up some small stones from the ground and started tossing them toward the women, hoping to get their attention. At first, they didn't react. They continued talking in their strange language, as if they hadn't noticed her at all. But then, after a few moments, the conversation stopped. The women went silent, but they didn't move. Suddenly, they began to slowly turn their heads toward her. My sister felt her heart begin to race. She couldn't see their faces yet, but the way they moved was unsettling. It was as if time had slowed down, and the air around her grew heavy. Halfway through their turn, the women let out a soft, eerie laugh, a laugh that was neither loud nor joyful. It was more like a whisper of amusement, but it sent shivers down her spine. The laughter was enough to break her nerve. My sister, who had been sitting there frozen, suddenly jumped up and ran inside the house as fast as she could. She didn't stop until she reached my parents' bedroom, waking up my dad in a panic. Breathless and shaking, she told him everything she had seen. Of course, my dad was skeptical at first, thinking it might just be some kids messing around or maybe even her imagination. But he agreed to go outside and check, just to be sure. When he stepped outside to look, there was no sign of the women. The bench was empty, just as dusty and abandoned as it had been the day before. My dad walked around the house, checking the front and backyards, but found nothing unusual. The women were gone, vanished as quickly as they had appeared. Over the next few days, my sister couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. She wasn't someone who believed in ghosts or the supernatural, but there was no denying that what she had seen was strange. The house next door remained empty, and there were no reports of anyone trespassing or hanging around the property. A few months later, the house was finally sold to a new family. They seemed nice enough, always greeting us with polite smiles whenever we saw them. But something was off. They didn't stay long. After less than a month, they packed up and moved out without any explanation. My parents tried to ask them if everything was okay, but they always seemed nervous, as if they were afraid to talk about why they were leaving. Their smiles were thin and strained, and they avoided eye contact. Not long after the family moved out, we noticed that the house wasn't being put back up for sale. It just stood there, empty again, for what seemed like ages. The windows gathered dust, the garden grew wild, and no one seemed interested in living there. Rumors started to spread around the neighborhood. Some people said the house was cursed, while others whispered about seeing strange things at night, shadows moving in the windows, lights flickering on and off when no one was home. My sister couldn't shake the feeling that the two women she had seen that morning were connected to the house in some way. Maybe they were spirits, tied to the land, or perhaps they were something else entirely. But whatever they were, they left an impression that lingered long after they were gone. Years passed, and eventually, the house was torn down. A new building was put up in its place, but even that didn't seem to fix whatever was wrong with the property. Every family that moved and left within a few months. No one could explain why, and no one really wanted to talk about it. To this day, my sister still remembers that morning vividly. She says that whenever she thinks about those women turning their heads and laughing, she gets goosebumps all over. And even though she tries to brush it off as just a weird, unexplainable event, deep down, she knows that what she saw wasn't normal. It was something beyond our understanding, something that still haunts her thoughts, even all these years later.